What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Weekend Roundup here on Touchline Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content going up on the channel. 70 years in the making. Finally, Newcastle have their long awaited domestic trophy coming in the form of the Carabao Cup, beating Liverpool in the final. That is the only place to start this weekend roundup. And I do want to go to the Newcastle side of this first. I think the more interesting story is Liverpool, but the winners' right history this day, first and foremost, is about Newcastle. The performance, really good, absolutely deserving winners. Anybody who watched the game would understand that part, so I'm not going to spend too much time on the game itself. I want to talk more about the ramifications of it. Your Newcastle born and raised Dan Burn gets the goal. Alexander Isak could have had a hat trick, ultimately gets one to really give them some cushion. Chiesa scores that late goal for Liverpool, gives them a little bit of life, but it was pretty much over at that point. And this is the kind of stuff that you hope for when you have all this money come into the club. And yeah, there's all of the questions, concerns, criticism surrounding that, and all of it is valid. But for the players on the field, again, this is Dan Burn who scored the goal. And they haven't just gone out and bought, yes, they've invested in the Sven Botmans and the Alexander Isaks. But this is largely the same team that's been there for a few seasons now, right? It's not like they're going and buying the best player every single year, PSR. And this is why domestic trophies matter. I'm going to give Eddie Howe credit again because I just don't think he gets enough of it. Of course, he needed the team to be able to do this, right? It goes hand in hand. And this is always my thing with managers is, are they overachieving? Or at least doing what is expected with the talent, the resources at their disposal? He overachieved at Bournemouth. You give him more resources, more talent. And this is pretty much where Newcastle should be, right? Maybe they're slightly underachieving, slightly overachieving, depending on the season. They're not to a place where they've learned how to navigate the Champions League and the Premier League yet. That's natural, that's understandable, that's not just them. But there are only so many opportunities out there to go get a trophy, to actually win something. And Newcastle fans know that as well as anyone, having had to wait 70 years for this opportunity. And so there's always been this weird thing for me that everybody talks about top four, and of course Champions League is awesome and a really cool accomplishment. But there's something about actually winning something. And this season, this might end up being the theme here. Also, what we've got going on in the FA Cup. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. You have so many teams like Newcastle who on their day can go beat any team in the Premier League, even Liverpool. And so if the chips fall right, you get this special moment. And to do it without Anthony Gordon, with Isak still dealing with some injuries, this is what it's all about. This is why domestic cups matter. And so, just first and foremost, props to Newcastle. They've been waiting a very, very long time for this. However you feel about the club, the way it's run, the ownership, all of that stuff. They came so close. They got back. They got the job done this time. They were deserving winners. There is nothing controversial about this. Props to Eddie Howe. Props to those players for delivering in the big moment. Now, the other part of this, and why these moments are so special, is because they are so difficult to achieve. To me, the biggest story coming out of this is this idea a week ago, Liverpool had basically clinched the Premier League, were leading going into a second leg at home in the Champions League round of 16, and were the heavy favorites to win this game and lift a trophy. Had they gotten through this 3-game stretch, last weekend's Premier League game, Champions League midweek, Carabao Cup final, with 3 wins, or at least advancing in the Champions League, they would have been in perfect position. You can't ask for anything more than domestic cups, don't have to worry about them. We got eliminated from one early, we won the other one. They're taken care of. We're through in the Champions League, and unlike some of these other teams, we can rotate our squad in the Premier League and rest some guys. We don't have to play Mo Salah 90 minutes every game because we're 15 points clear. I mean, now it's 12, but it was 15 at the beginning of this. And we can prioritize the Champions League because one of the biggest challenges that I don't think we spend enough time talking about for teams trying to win multiple trophies, for teams expected to compete on 3-4 fronts, is figuring out how to prioritize it. Because obviously you go, okay, League, Champions League, domestic cups are secondary. But if you field a weak team on the wrong day, a la Liverpool against Plymouth Argyle, you just lost an opportunity at a trophy. And if you put too much emphasis on league stage Champions League games, right? Liverpool did a great job in the league stage. Or whatever it's called now. You know what I mean. And it didn't matter at all. And they still drew PSG. And then they lost. So it's such a delicate balance, and there is such a small margin for error. Right? Because and this game changes that conversation a little bit because they just got outplayed. They had a bad day. And that happens. But to have that happen on top of the unfortunate series of events that led to them getting eliminated from the Champions League, had they won that shootout and showed up in this game, they are in great position to be one of the best teams, best individual seasons in the history of English football. And because they lost a penalty shootout and they had picked the wrong day to have a bad game, they're going to walk away with one trophy. Right? If they play this way in the Premier League, it doesn't matter. But they had a trophy on the line. They didn't deliver. Newcastle did. And so to kind of bring this full circle, that's why even a Carabao Cup, as much criticism as it gets sometimes, and as much as it's kind of an afterthought, this stuff has to matter and it has to be a big deal, and Newcastle should celebrate their hearts out. Because what Liverpool just went through is ultimate proof of how difficult it is to win trophies, even ones that you are expected to win. There is no guarantee. How many times did Manchester City go in as Champions League favorites and not win? And this is also why having multiple competitions is fun, and what kind of makes it special. And what sets soccer apart is that multiple teams can now have these really awesome moments and things that make their season a success. I'm just a firm believer that trophies have to mean something. The process has to mean something, and trophies have to mean something. They don't mean everything, right? There's this interesting conversation of where Newcastle are and what this trophy means, and what it means for Liverpool that they didn't win this trophy and they got knocked out of the Champions League right before. Because they're all independent things. And that's the final part of this that I'll talk about for a second here. Right? I just don't buy this idea that you can put it all together collectively. The Champions League is a different situation than the Premier League, which is a different situation than the cup competitions. And so each team has to figure out how they want to emphasize and prioritize all of those different things. But it doesn't make Liverpool's season a failure because they lost in a final and had a bad day, and they lost a penalty shootout in the round of 16. What if PSG go on to win the Champions League? Of course, there's no guarantee they do. But that's where you just have to, sometimes things go your way, sometimes they don't. So none of this should take away from what Liverpool have accomplished. And part of that is because they have the Champions Leagues, right? This group of players has already conquered Europe. They have gotten to these Champions League finals. They have come out on top. So it's not like that is missing from their resume, missing from their legacy. It'd be a different conversation if they had never gotten to a final, had never won one. This is why it's so difficult to win to do the treble. They're all different stories. They're all individual stories. I'm just not a fan of putting them together. Liverpool are clearly the best team in the Premier League this season. They have been the best team in the world collectively across all competitions. They happened to face a really tough draw, weren't at their best, and deserved, at the end of the day, they got outplayed in the Champions League over 2 legs, and they got outplayed in the Carabao Cup final. It happens. But had they gotten through this, then all of that energy and focus could go to just the Champions League. And does that mean they win it? No. Who knows? But that's the margins we're talking about. We got to keep that in mind. That's really what I came away from all of this thinking about, is how close we are to having a completely different conversation about Liverpool. Which also means we can't swing too far in the other direction and say the season was a failure or a disappointment or anything like that. Go back to the beginning of the season. Would Liverpool fans have taken this? Runaway Premier League champions, get to Wembley for a cup final, lose a really hard-fought 2-leg tie against PSG in the Champions League? We all know the answer is yes. Just because they came out on the wrong side of a couple of results here doesn't change that. It's why teams don't win trebles. It's really, really hard to do. So don't. This is more about Newcastle in terms of, right? This game was much more important to Newcastle than it was Liverpool. Liverpool's legacy this season is going to be what they have done in the Premier League, the fact that they have won it in Arne Slot's first season. Everything else would have been a bonus. They're not going to get that bonus. That's okay. That's ultimately not what they're going to be remembered for. And nor should they. A couple other things real quickly here. 2 Premier League games and just the general idea that I do want to talk about in for a second here, the theme of the weekend, missed opportunities. You've got all these teams fighting, battling for top 4, battling for maybe top 5, Champions League qualification, Europa League qualification. You've got Newcastle, who aren't playing because they've got the Carabao Cup. You've got Manchester City playing Brighton. Both of those teams at different points felt like they had that game won or could have had that game won. Brighton easily could have gotten a winner at the end. Manchester City had leads. Ultimately, it was probably a fair result. Maybe Brighton were a little bit unlucky to only settle for a point. But either of those teams could have had a really, really big weekend by getting that win. Ultimately, they have to settle. So then you go, that's Saturday, then you go to Sunday, where you've got Chelsea, who just watched both of those teams drop points. Newcastle don't have an opportunity to gain points. And they come out flat without Cole Palmer against Arsenal. And so really, again, the major winner here is Newcastle. That nobody else took advantage of this opportunity to put 3 points on the board, to make Newcastle match that when they get to make this game up, to gain on the other teams that drop points. And so it's just a great all around weekend for Newcastle. Really is the bottom line here. And so not that much change. Chelsea are still there, City are still there, Brighton are still within striking distance. But any of them could have really solidified and taken a big step toward finishing in that top 4, top 5. And none of them did. So now Newcastle have an opportunity, and you just kind of leave everybody in contention. And now it's about how do you finish the last couple months of the season here. That is all for this edition of the Weekend Roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.